I looked over at the clock, ticking away on my wall. It appeared it was about 5:30 in the morning. No wonder the sun was only just starting to peak. It would be more than an hour before anybody showed up to start waking me for the day. Of all the things that I did expect, a lesson on the history of the man in the pinstripe suit was not something I was expecting this morning, but it does somewhat help clarify the nature of the man, if not in its entirety, at least somewhat. So he's not pure evil, and he does have a standard, a code of ethics that he works by. I suppose that is a good thing. It means I shouldn't have to worry about him coming after me on account of losing that little exchange of ours. One might expect a sour loser to take offense. But that pretty blonde woman seemed nice, and she works for him, and she seemed to be pretty certain that he was not going to do anything like that. That wasn't the type of guy he was. Well, that was at least good. Regardless, the fact that I'm up might work to my advantage. I didn't tend to have much time to invest in learning about magic throughout my regular day. I was usually surrounded by adults, teachers, tutors, the governess, my mother, or maids. There was very little spare time. So if I was going to learn about magic, I would have to take up every spare second that I could get. I should probably start waking up early and staying up a little late. Being able to access magic is a crucial tool at this point. It could give me an advantage in lots of different categories. It all depends on how I'm able to use it. I reached into my pocket where I had tucked away the small crystal I had been handed. Taking a close look at it, it seemed like a clear crystal with a mixture of colorful dim lights inside of it, slightly glowing. One end seemed to have a silver metal casing that encompassed it, with a small loop on it, as if it was meant to be run through a string, so one could wear it like a necklace, or a bracelet perhaps. This was the magical index, the key to my master plan. At least I hoped it would be when I got it. According to the instructions I read in the book last night, all one has to do is announce magical index in order to summon or unsummon the book. So I took a breath, crossed my fingers. Magical index, I said aloud. There was a shine from the crystal, and suddenly it floated out of my hand, and with a silvery sheen, it lit up, the light spreading out until a book emerged. It was a rather ornate-looking book. It had fine leather exterior with a silver metal border on the backing. There was no obvious label on the book, but I think the fact that it simply sat there floating in the air was impressive enough. I reached out, grabbing the book from air, placing it in my lap while I sat on the floor. I opened the cover of the book to find a blank page. For a moment, I thought I might have been swindled, until a small shimmer of silver light began to scrawl across the page, leaving behind solid silver lettering. The words spelled out, "Your request, please." I wasn't actually sure how to interact with the book from this point forward. I didn't get to read that deeply into the description. I was a little busy at the moment. Life and death games and all that. So first I tried simply stating a request. "Introductory information about magic?" I said aloud. Suddenly the book's pages began to fold over, whirling towards the center of the book. Once reaching the midsection, I saw that the pages seemed empty at first. Then, like magic, I suppose, the pages began to fill with vast amounts of information, writing, pictures, everything in great detail. And it began with a basic description of what magic is and how it works. I spent the next hour or so poring through all the information I could on it. The first level of information that I gathered, I had already actually heard. You know, the whole basically everything is magic thing. That everything exists with a slight amount of magical power in it. that in essence, everything that is alive has some measure of magic power, no matter how slight, including our souls and even our emotions, carried their own elements of magical power. That much I had already heard from Alice. I was actually just starting to reach the interesting parts when I suddenly heard the maid approaching my room for the morning. So I spoke aloud, magical index, and the book dissipated back into its small crystal form. And just like that, the tedium of my regular day continued. From then on, it was basically normal. All the same old things. My tutors, my lessons, my art teacher doing her best to try to teach me how to paint. I still wasn't getting too much of a grasp on it, but I tried to be proficient nonetheless. I spent the next week or so in the same fashion that my regular life tends to be, taking every opportunity I could to read through the magical index and start to learn about magic. And I was actually quite surprised at how complex magic is. Even trying to get through the introduction was incredibly complex. I thought it would be complex, but after actually starting to studying it, it stretched way beyond what I had expected to see. For starters, I figured out that there are actually 3 base kinds of casters when it comes to using magic. This is usually the first element that people find out about themselves when they're learning how to use it. First, there are naturals. These are people who don't need any extra things in order to use magical energy. They simply have a natural ability to attune and hone it. And that naturally by itself, magical energy, tends to align with natural energy, meaning that natural casters usually have a natural ability to control specific elements: fire, water, ice, electricity, earth, even naturally occurring plants. Natural casters have a natural ability to use their energy kind of like a magnet. They produce a small amount of energy from themselves, and somehow this attracts other energy, the energy of naturally occurring elements, allowing them to create and manipulate them. The second type of caster is not known as a natural. They're basically the middle ground. People who are in this category have a natural acquaintance with magic. However, their energy alone doesn't actually affect any magical abilities. They, unlike the natural casters, actually have to channel that energy in order to create any kind of effect. The normal way that these type of magical casters channel that energy is usually verbally, which is a whole nother set of rules in and of itself, actually. When I first heard the woman in the blonde hair casting spells, I assumed that the words she was saying were specific spells that somebody just came up with, that it was the full set of words themselves that generated the entire effect. In actuality, it's far from that. The act of casting magic when you're not a natural caster basically equated to engineering almost. Basically, in order to create any kind of magical effect, one basically has to create a process and send the magical energy through that process in order to make it fulfill the function. The same way that we turn oil into gas, like exchanging it through chemistry, like water being able to change from ice to water to gas by turning into steam. It's a matter of arranging different functions. The actual spoken words aren't actually necessary. People really just use them as a memory attachment, I guess. Makes it easier to remember the specific process. Each syllable in a word is connected to a specific type of magical process. For example, the letters SE, which brings about the syllable C, might amount to a magical function of siphon, as to pull energy from something, and that's simply the first part of that magical process. C is just them pulling the energy from a specific thing, and then the next syllable tells you what to do with that energy after it's been siphoned. For example, LA might mean to store that energy. So by mixing SL and LA, saying Sila, you're creating a combination of magical functions. The first one siphoning energy from something, and the second one storing that energy somewhere. The verbal incantations are basically just a quick way to produce what you might call a one-time use magical machine that takes the energy, the magical energy, from wherever it's coming from, and then sends it through a refining process until it reaches the other side, allowing you to use a specific magical effect. In the book, there are countless hundreds of different combinations, all having different meanings, different effects, and that can be combined in basically any way you can think of. Even your mental intentions when you're casting the spell actually have their own effect. So basically, them saying the spell is just a way for them to simplify an incredibly complex process, and by doing it in the right order, they create a spell. The second type of caster only needs to use this in order to produce magic. They can also do it just through visualization, but it's much more difficult without the enunciation. I suppose it's simply easier for people to associate them with spoken words. And then finally, the last type of caster, which is an items caster. People who fall into this category have kind of the short end of the stick. They're not like the naturals or the midsections. They, unfortunately, without some type of focus or magical item, can't actually use magic at all. Surely enough, they have magical energy, just like everyone else in existence, but it's actually the magical object they're wielding that does the work of channeling that magical energy, not them. It's basically the same as people who need glasses to be able to see. Without the glasses, they can't see, and just like that, people in this magical section can't use magic unless they have an object. Like in the old fairy tale books, where wizards use wands. They're using them because they have to, because they can't use magic without the wand. And even then, I'm still only beginning to break the surface. There's just so much to magic. I never expected it to be this deep. But anything worth doing is worth doing right.